Hey guys, in this video we're going to start going through the production example. I know I've mentioned it a lot during this series, but it's time to actually start putting some of those lessons to the test. So this lesson, as part of being kind of, just the grooming process, not sped up, just going through it, this is going to be a little bit more slightly rambly than the previous lessons. If you want to learn specifics on how stuff works, please revisit the other lessons. I was able to get a lot more structure to those. This one will be a lot more just kind of going through things as we need to. And yeah, so it's going to split into a few different parts. This first part is going to be going from our model, which we set up in the first lesson, no point redoing that. Then going through creating our groom, starting off with basic mass, doing some guides, and then once I've covered the basics, I will end the video. I will then record kind of a real-time video of the guide grooming process, so that is an optional video. I do recommend watching it though, and that is a video where I just groom. I don't necessarily try to teach per se, I just go through the process, and any moment that I have where I can teach something, like as I'm doing it, then I will bring it up. And once we finish that video, we'll then do another short video where we go through and do clumping, noise, cut, and then again at the end of that do another longer video where I go through the refinement stages, and then we'll just do a quick summary at the end. So this will be the video where we put everything to test. Again, if you're skipping the first lessons to go to this just because you're hoping to save time, don't do that, because there's a reason the other lessons are all broken apart so much, so you can learn it in easily digestible chunks. But yeah, so I guess the best thing to do is get on with it. So obviously we've got our scene. This is just the model that we set up in lesson 1. I have redone it since because I didn't save that scene. So it might be mildly different, but ultimately it's the same setup. So we've got a life-size head, which is just a mannequin head, and we have our scalp geometry. Our scalp geometry has clean UVs, as like this. They're all in the first shooter, and it's as symmetrical as I could get it, but the symmetry thing doesn't really matter as much. Naming-wise, it's just called XGen Scalp 01. Depending on your scene, depending on the characters that you're doing, you may want to actually name these more specifically. And another key consideration to make is that the transformations are completely frozen on the object. If they're not, just going to modify for each transformations. And this scalp also goes further than the hairline. So the hairline will stop around here. I want the scalp to go further than that, just so when masking the groom, it's easy, really easy to remove hair, but it's impossible to add hair past the scalp mesh. So to make your life easier, just take more than you need. You could argue that I've not got enough as well, especially areas like this, but for the sake of a quick example, this is all we need. And yeah, so we've got that. And the general scene itself you can find in the assets folder. I will be given this scene, like this exact one, and so you can start from there if you wish to. The next thing, before we even open XGen, is to decide on a hairstyle. So since this is a beginner's lesson, I'm not going to go through matching an exact person, because I feel like that is a very large task and can take quite a long time, and on your first 15-20 grooms you're not going to be able to kind of exactly match something. So it's best just to learn the general styles. So with that in mind, I've just got some general images from the internet. I've opened them in PureRef. So I just googled men's side parting and got a few images that are of similar length. This guy's hair is a little bit short at the back, but the angle for the side was probably one of the best I could find for the parting side, because most of the images from the side were on the side that's been pushed over. So we're using these as kind of a loose inspiration, and we'll just be kind of going through the general process of how I'd tackle something like this. But yeah, so before you start a groom, gather some references, load them in PureRef, or just have Google open on a second screen or on your phone, whatever kind of works for you. So I'm just going to move that off screen, just so we've got more real estate for what we're actually doing. Move that over here. So let's get started. I'm just going to open XGen, and I'm going to, with the scalp selected, create a new description. The collection I'm just going to call Production Example 01 Collection. And this one, I'm just going to call this Fur Head 01 Description. We're going to start with splines randomly across the surface using guides. Again, if you want an explanation of all this stuff, how to do it, just revert back to, I believe it's lesson 3 or lesson 4, and that will kind of talk through what these all do, and then come back to this video afterwards. So I'm just going to hit create, and first thing we'll notice is that we can't generate any hair, and that's because there's no guides. So here's where there's two different kind of approaches from this point. I know it seems really early for there to be different approaches, but it's just how it is. So we could start with a mask to define where all the hair will go and then build guides to that mask, or we can start with guides and then fit a mask to those guides. I personally prefer to do guides first, so that's what I'm going to do. So one issue that we're going to run into while we're doing this though is that while selecting scalp or anything else is kind of tricky sometimes, so I recommend setting up geometry layers. If you don't know about geometry layers, don't worry about that. Just go into the channel box editor, which is this button here. I'm just going to delete that layer. Delete layer. And all I'm going to do is select my scalp and then zoom out, invert the selection so that it's selected everything except the scalp. And I'm going to create a layer using this. I'm just going to name that to _geo. Oh, let's just put geo _ layer. And set that to black. So now I can set this to be a reference layer, which means I can't select it, and that means my scalp is the only possible object to select. And I'm also just going to create a separate layer for this guy and just call this one scalp layer. All caps isn't necessary, I'm just holding it down. And there we go. And this one I'm not going to keep in a reference layer, I'm just going to keep that as it is, and I'll hide it and kind of reference it whenever I need to. Let's get back into action. And again, considering this, we need to start placing some guides. So the general approach I like to go for is the sparsest guides I can do to begin with. So what I mean by that is a temptation for a lot of people when they start a groom is to kind of focus on one area. So let's say for like this area, you might end up spending like 20 minutes just doing these guides at the front, but then not actually doing the hairs on the rest of the head. That's generally not how I like to work personally, so I will be kind of placing one guide at the front, then a guide at the side, a guide at the back, and we'll get into the reason more as we go along. But for now, I'm just going to move that to the side. And I'm going to pick which side parts. So I think having this side be the parting is what I want to do. That's the opposite of the reference, so I guess actually we should go to this side, but I just want to do it on this side. So the hair is going to flow kind of towards his right eye, our screen left. So I'm just going to place a guide. I'm going to go around here. And now a key thing to mention there is, you know, I'm not overly picky on exactly where that is. Like the hairline may not be right. And that's a really important thing to stress here is this is a iterative process. When you're grooming, the first time you place a guide, it will not be right. Don't worry about it. Just place it, do the best you can, then move on to a different area. The reason I say move on to a different area rather than stay on it for too long is because as you build more guides for the head, you will slowly start to find the issues with your own guides. Like you'll place a guide for the side and then realize, oh, there's not enough space for this, and that shows you what's wrong with the previous guides you've done. If you just place a guide and then delete it, then place it and delete it, you'll never get anywhere. So I'm just going to place that guide and I'm going to scale it up. So I'm just estimating the hair length. Something like this should be okay, maybe a little bit longer. And I'm also going to go into the XGen tab, and then the first thing I'm going to do is middle mouse click and drag this demon of a button right here. This converts our hair into geometry and will crash most people's scenes when they start, unless you're on a pretty powerful computer, but even then you're going to be sat waiting for a while. So move that over, and that allows me to use the sculpt tool without worrying about clicking on the wrong thing. So let's just move this over. And again, because this video is going to be like an abridged version, I'm not going to spend too long on guides, although this is still real time, so do expect me to just be kind of pushing and pulling things around to begin with. So I'm just going to take a moment to look at my reference. The reference is primarily swept backwards, so let's just do something like this. We may want to go even longer on the hair, so actually I'm going to do that now. Something like that. And that will do for now. So I'm just looking at primarily these references here. So it kind of comes forward, bows out, and then goes back on itself, which is pretty much what this is doing. Arguably a little bit too much. There we go. Something like that will do for now. There we go. I don't want to spend much longer than that. So I'm also just going to rebuild that guide so we get a little bit more control. I like to go for 7 or 8 CVs on this length of hair. And that just gives me just a little bit more kind of freedom with the shapes. You may also find that your kind of first instincts with the volume of the hair may be a bit low. It's easy enough to fix, so don't worry about it too much, but I generally like to kind of add more volume than I necessarily need in the hair. So that means just bigger guides further from the head. A lot of people, what they'll do is they'll make a guide super flat to the head, and that's very rarely how hair actually is. I mean, probably this is too much volume, but yeah, I don't want to spend too long on it because that's kind of one of the points of the video, so I'm going to move on. So our parting, I think we'll do it this way. So one quick thing to mention is when people do partings, they always seem to do, and this includes me, I've done this plenty of times, they seem to do a perfectly straight parting that goes perfectly flatly along the side. Whereas again, looking at our reference, it doesn't seem to actually do that most of the time. It seems to kind of go back towards the middle of the head, like as if we had like a little triangle going towards this point. So I'm going to do the same there. Although with this being a parting, I'm just going to quickly create one guide here, just for the other side of the parting. And he's going to be considerably shorter than this hair. Something like this should be fine. And again, you may be thinking, oh, well, you're just saying don't work in one area, but this is because there is a drastic change in hair direction. So I feel like it's fine to kind of spend a little bit of time just to get that parting in place. Something like that will do for now. And I'm now realizing that this is way too far back, but we can fix that in a moment. So let's just create another guide. I'm going to go for the back of the hair. So let's go for like somewhere like here. So this is roughly where the crown will be. And I'm going to do this on the parting side. So to get the correct length to begin with, I'm just going to select this guide. So copy guide shape by holding right click and paste guide shape. And I can just sculpt that, and our reference is dictating that it kind of falls backwards. Now chances are this will be too long for this area, so I can always scale it down. So let's just do that. So I have a slow gradient in length. And just do something like that. It does kind of fold over itself in the reference. And the key thing is, obviously, like my reference isn't on screen, but it's on my right monitor, and I'm checking it every couple seconds, because one part of being an artist is coming to the realization that most of us suck at making things look natural. If you work without reference, whether it's sculpting or grooming or anything really, you're going to be looking for patterns that don't exist. So I always recommend just constantly checking your reference. Okay, so next hair I'm going to do, let's do one down here. So this will be like some of the last hairs before it starts going down the side of the head. I'm just going to copy this guide shape. There we go. Paste guide shape. I will scale it down a little bit. And then just pull that back. So whenever you see me scale, I'm just pressing the R key, and then I'm pressing the G key to repeat last tool, which is the sculpt tool. And that just allows me to quickly switch between scaling, rotating, moving, but moving doesn't really work, and the sculpt tool. So I'm just going to pull that back. So it looks like it kind of wants to go behind the ear in that area for the reference. So let's just do something like that. Cool. So let's now move just behind the ear. So I think somewhere like here should be fine. And then I'm just going to copy that guide shape, paste, and just move that down this way. So that is definitely too short, so let's just boost that length a bit. And if you're wondering kind of how I'm telling if stuff is too short, it's something that will over time become second nature to you. It's really hard to say, oh well, there's this rule and this rule, because frankly there isn't really much rules to this. It depends on how the hairdresser or the barber did it. It also depends on if the person cut their own hair, like it might be a little bit less consistent. So it's just a case of check your reference constantly. A key note to make is that you can't see the root of the hairs. Like when you're looking at reference, you may think, like for this area for example, the hair's this long. So like this white line here, you might think, oh, the hair's this long, but actually the hair probably stops about here, because most of it is covered by other hairs. So always add a lot more than you think you need to begin with anyway. Because I normally find that hair is made too short in a lot of kind of early grooms, and especially looking back at my old stuff, it's definitely how it was. Although this may be too long, so I'm just going to scale that back up and just get something like that. Let's move on to the next area. I'm going to add one in the middle back here. Scale it up to roughly the length I want. So I don't want it to fade down too much in length. I think I'm going to go for something more like this guy rather than these two. So we're going to keep that like a medium length for the back, which may also mean still bringing this guy down even more. So maybe the first scale that we did was correct. We'll find out later. So I'm just going to pull that pretty flat. So this is going to be at kind of the back hairline, so it can be pretty flat to the skin. Obviously, if this was further up, we'd need to make sure it's giving other hairs room, but something like that is fine for now. I'm going to add another guide for the left side of his parting. And this one, again, just going to switch reference. This one just flows kind of down and backwards. So the length here, the length difference will be a bit smaller because it's closer to the crown, so the barber would normally cut that similar length. And we're just going to do something like that. Give it a little bit more volume from the head. Something like that should do for now. And then just because it's a crown, I'm going to add a guide here, and this is functionally the end of the crown. And we just need to pick a side to be a bit more dominant. I'm going to scale it up slightly and just move that over to the left. So I'm just going to make it so that this top half is the most dominant. And when I say dominant, I mean like it's the shape that has the most control in the area. So I'm just going to mimic that a little bit there. Because naturally the hairs in this area should blend because that's where the parting ends. So, well, strictly speaking, maybe this side should work a bit better because this is falling over. Yeah, so let's do that instead. And this is what I mean, this is an iterative process. Like, I've been grooming for years and I still like kind of doubt my own kind of choices a lot of times, and normally I'm correct to doubt them because most of the time the first ones are wrong. And that's a really key thing to understand over time when you start grooming. Yeah, so these guides are crossing over, but that's fine just because this hair is supposed to be flopping over the back. Strictly speaking, this should be neatly parting that way, but that's not what I want for this character. Cool, so let's scale this guy down. And you can see what I mean when I say that I really space my guides out a lot. These are really far apart, but the reason I do that is because now XGen's going to start doing some of the work for me, which is really, really helpful. So if I place a guide right here, the length is going to be roughly half of these two. Well, the shape is going to be roughly half of these two. So I can just get the sculpt tool, pull that down. I'm going to have it flow slightly towards this side. And there we go, it's starting to do the work for us, which is really, really helpful. And that works better when you cover more of the scalp. So let's just do that. I'm going to add a guide down here for this corner. Let's scale you down slightly. And I'm going to curl that forward. A lot of men's hair curls forward behind the ear, so let's do something like that. Give it a little bit of volume. Well, I guess it's at the hairline, around the hairline anyway. Let's do that. And then let's start building some more curves for the parting. So I think there is about halfway. And then this is where it starts to get a little bit more confused. So I'm going to copy this guide shape here. Copy guide shape, select you, and paste. And again, because there's a slight gradient in length, I'm just going to increase the length of that guide by scaling it. And then in general, this has worked pretty well, but we will need to give it more volume. We'll probably need to give this guy more volume too. Something like that looks like it's working pretty well. Let's go to this guy, give him a little bit more volume. Hairs like to stand up quite a lot. Definitely a lot more than people give them credit for, especially if they're at a parting. So there we go. So we slowly start to build this out. If I show the groom now, it's obviously not going to look good, but we're starting to get a general idea for what the hair is going to be doing. So I definitely need to move this parting forward. So I think what I'm going to do is, rather than move the guides themselves, I'm just going to paste the guide where I want it to go. And actually interpolation is doing the right job, but I'm just going to select that and paste it. Of course, we can move a guide if we want to. I just prefer to paste, but if you really want to move it, you can just go into the Add and Move tool, hold Control, and just drag it where you want that. And that will move the hair. But in this case, that's not really what I want to do. But I'll keep this for now. So actually, a little bit further back, I think. Is that there? I'm going to delete you because you're a bit close. And then let's just quickly reshape those guides, because now they're in a different place, they would need a different shape. Something like this. And then here's a nice thing we can do. Since the hair is going to be mostly symmetrical, I can mirror these guides over. So an important note to make is that this model is Z forward, which is something I mentioned in the model requirements lesson. So what that means is, if you look in the bottom left here, we've got these little axes, or you can check the move tool. The blue arrow is forward, which means that our symmetry tool will work. So just symmetrize that over. that works in world space, I believe, so they should work as long as the model itself is symmetrical. So most of these are quite close together, but we'll ignore that for now. I'm going to grab this guide and have him not go towards the middle, something like that maybe. Check his shape from the side view. And here's a keynote to make as well. Obviously I've just copied these guides over, but I'm not leaving them. The last thing you want to do is have actually symmetrical guides, because that's just not how hair works. Hair is very asymmetrical at times. The reason I copied it over is just to save time on remaking the exact same shapes. So like getting the length and getting the general flow angle, because the flow angle wouldn't have changed much. There we go, something like that. So now let's get some more guides on this side. I'm going to go for about here. We may find, yep, the guide's gone on the inside of the head. Sometimes pressing 4 may help you find your guides. And the reason it did that is just because the interpolation was trying to go between this hair, which is going kind of up and to the left, and then this hair, which is going down and to the left. So naturally, it interpolated mathematically perfectly, but that's not necessarily what we want. So all it did is put it inside the head. I'm going to copy this shape just so we get a similar length. And let me just move my reference around on my other screen. This image as well. So now I'm looking at this image to see how the hair flows, and we can see that it kind of flows straight back. And he's still got the length change, it's just not as severe on this side. But let's just do that. So, sculpt tool. And this hair is definitely too long, so let's scale him down. And it looks like they flow pretty much straight backwards, so let's do that. And it looks like it needs to drop as well, so it kind of sticks out straight and then kind of flows backwards like that. Just quickly adjust the angle of this guy. There we go. So I'm going to try to move on from this point as soon as I can, so I'm just going to quickly rush through, place a few more guides, and talk a little bit less about the process. So just give me a moment to do that. Copy this guide. Just because I also want to cover masks and density, width, and all that stuff before I move on to like the kind of longer guide video, which will be about, I estimate, about 2 hours, 3 hours long to get the guides finished. Cool, I'm going to have that flow backwards towards all this because it's falling over itself. That may be too much volume, but we'll find out later, and we'll also adjust it later. Add another guide around here. So when I'm picking where to put my guides, I'm now just looking for big gaps. So there's no real landmarks in the side of the head. You could argue that I would need some more guides at the front, so we can do that. Let's add a guide about here. And lengthwise, I'm actually pretty happy with that. Let's just have it do this. Again, making sure to give it plenty of volume. Holding B to change the size of the brush. Cool. And then I'm just looking for big gaps. So the biggest gap, if we look at the roots of our curves, about here. Let's place a guide there, scale it up, rotate it out. And let's just figure out kind of how this hair should be shaped. So sometimes you'll find that you don't actually have much reference for a certain angle. If you're struggling, just go and hunt reference. In my case, again, with this being a basics lesson, I'm not worrying too much about teaching you how to match reference. It's more just teaching you the process. But by all means, definitely look into, lots of references and spend time really trying to understand them. And once you get more comfortable with grooming, you slowly start to just understand it naturally, and you can just build the guides in a way that makes sense for the haircut. Granted, that will change every time you pick a different reference. You can't learn all hairstyles at the same time. Let's go for a guide at the front here. Scale it up slightly. And I'm just going to do this. Scale up a little bit more. Something like that looks interesting to me. Although I do want it to be standing up a little bit straighter. Again, just because hair likes to stand up quite straight, you'll notice it more and more over time. It, again, depends on the hairstyle all the time. But You also find that the front of the hair curls forward quite a lot for a lot of people. Because again, the hair likes to stand up straight from the head, which at the front is forward. Do something like that. Cool. Let's get some more guides. Let's go there. Scale you slightly. And we're already at 25 minutes, so I'm going to push through this. So let's add a guide in the middle, and we should be able to start talking about the other stuff with this. So for now, that will do. Let's just show our hair. Yeah, there we go. So we're going to talk now about kind of creating masks and getting density right, and then we'll cut to the, well, it'll be a separate video, we won't cut to it, but then we'll kind of end this video and go for a real-time guide grooming, and that will be a lot less structured than this, because it will purely be me going back and forth and working. But for now, let's just go into the mask first. So to start the mask, I'm just going to go into the density mask just here, go to create map, and I'm going to call this fur head 01, and then let's call it mask. I'm going to set default color to black, and then map resolution 5 is okay for now. So you'll notice immediately that we can't see what's going on, and you may think, oh no, it's immediately broken. It hasn't. What you're seeing is you've got the head. There you go. So see how the scalp changes color? It's because we're not actually seeing the scalp right now, we're seeing the head below it. So let's go back into Action, hit the paint tool, and there we go. You also notice I've got two brushes, so I literally only found this out the other day. This actually is symmetry in the paint tool, but it's hidden. It's called reflection rather than symmetry. So I'm going to use that just to kind of block things out quicker, and the hair is generally quite symmetrical, but of course we can turn that off. Again, it's in world space, you can do screen if you want to, but I'm not going to. And yeah, so let's go to the map. I'm going to paint white, and I'm going to paint it with a solid brush, just so we know we're actually painting the value of white. And then let's hide the hair for a moment, and just block out the general hairline that we want to go for. And now is normally when you see what's wrong with your guides as well. So I'm just going to do something like that. Go down to you. So reflection, you can't 100% rely on it. Like sometimes there will be very mild asymmetry in your model, and that might be enough to throw off the painting. So just be aware, like, you know, once you've done this, don't immediately be like, okay, I'm done now. Look around the whole model, make sure you've actually filled everything in. So I'm going to paint you in white. And we'll be doing, again, because this is a very iterative workflow grooming, we're going to be kind of going back on this and doing a bit more work. There we go, something like that. Our guide's definitely very asymmetrical here. So let's go something like that. And then we can move our guides to adjust. So that should be fine for now. We can obviously fix that later. We'll probably need to make this, in fact, let's do that. Let's set that to black. Normally you find that this area back here is a lot sharper than what you expect. Pull that forward. Holding Control to invert the brush. And then just going to fill that in. There we go. You often find that this line can literally be a perfect rectangle, so that might help you. Definitely want to fix that. But yeah, so there we go. I'm just going to hit Save Textures. Again, as I addressed in the previous lessons, if you don't hit this, you will lose your textures when you reopen Maya, so make sure you save this texture. And that will save the actual image. And then we're just going to our PTEX, save you as well. And now our hair is only generated where our map is painted. So now we need to get the density of the hair. And the easiest way to do that is obviously changing the density slider, but this number isn't a real number. So this is a density of 1, but obviously we've got way more than one hair. So this is the number of hairs per world unit. The way to find out the number of hairs you've done is to go into log, set statistics level, which yours will be 0 by default, set that to 1. And when you generate the groom, go down to log, and it will say, you know, how long it took to generate this many primitives. So this is your number of hairs, 772. The average human head has roughly 70 to 120 to 150,000. It depends on hair color mostly. generally speaking, dark hair men tend to have around 80 to 90,000 hairs. So we just need to go, is it 100 times more? I think it's 100 times more. So let's set you to 100 and check what that generates. So now we've got 70,000 hairs, 73,627 hairs. We also need to pump that up a little bit more, so let's go for 120 density. Now we've got 88,000, so that's a good number. So now we can leave this alone. We also now have the issue with the map where it's kind of got that texel effect, like you can see, not texel effect, like kind of really pixelated effect. That's not our map resolution, that is our PTEX map resolution. So to fix that, I'm just going to go into expression editor, change this to, let's say, 10 and see how that is. Apply, and then just resave the map. And there we go. So that's a little bit better. It's still not perfect, so let's boost that up a little bit more. I'm going to go to 20. I like to step this number up slowly, and I don't like to start with a default number in most cases. There we go. So that's now good enough. A lot of our hairs disappeared. That's just because it was off screen, so we turn that off. There we go. So now we've got our 88,000 hairs, and they're fitting our mask. So next thing to do, well, next of two things, is to get our modifier CV count and our width working. So for the modifier CV count, I'm just going to up that. I'm just going to go up to 8 and see how that looks. And what you'll notice is as we increase this number, the hair gets smoother. It also gets closer to what the guides are doing. Naturally, you know, our parting's not working, but we will get to that. So we'll get to that in a moment, yeah, as I said. So I'm just going to pump that up just a little bit more. Let's go to 12. And this number, again, you want to keep as low as possible. We could arguably use 8, but I prefer to go just a little bit higher, just so that when I add noise later, I don't need to keep changing it. Next thing is the width. So the width is something you have to do by eye. I normally find that 0.01 is a good starting value though. So let's just do that. So that'll work as a starting value. It's sometimes really helpful to make sure you've got anti-aliasing turned on. So in your viewport, you just got this little like half sphere and half pixelated sphere. Just turn that on and it just makes it a lot easier to see. And we can also turn on ambient occlusion, but until you're doing clumping, that doesn't really help that much. And to make the preview a little bit nicer, we can just turn off tube shade as well. That just makes it a little bit easier to see what's going on. We will change that though to our own material later, but for now, we need to do taper. So since it's easier to see with tube shade on, I'm going to turn that back on. And if we go to the ends of our hairs, we'll notice that they're kind of square at the moment. So we just need to add some taper. So a good starting value is a taper of 0.8, and then set taper start also to 0.8. And generally speaking, these settings will give you a pretty close to average size hair if you're working to real world scale, which the demo scene I'm sending you guys is. Okay, so last thing we're going to do in this lesson before I move on to doing the real-time guide grooming is we need to do a region map and region mask. So we're going to go through this quite quick because there's a dedicated lesson for that, and I'm very conscious of the fact we're already at 33 minutes. So let's just go into the region map. We could click paint, although I prefer to create my own maps. I'll show you why in a moment. So I'm just going to go create map. The reason I like to is because we have control of map resolution, and we now know from working on our mask that if we use 5, it's going to be very pixelated, which isn't helpful for partings. So 20 was enough for the density. I'm going to go slightly higher than that. I'm going to go to 30, just to make sure that we've got plenty of resolution. And I'm also going to set the region map name to for head 01 region map. Let's click create. So that'll start off with red. I'm going to hide my groom. And as quick as I can, because staring at bright red is going to really hurt your eyes, I'm going to set the solid brush, go down to stroke, stylus pressure, turn that off. And then I'm going to set the color to one of the 6 sample colors, which we can always recall. So I'm just going to go to light blue. And all we need to do here is define what is left and what is right. So I'm just going to do a line right up the middle. And we're going to go to that middle guide that we placed. And when we were placing kind of the guide at the end of the parting, this is why. Once we've got that in place, I'm just going to continue that line down. You don't need to go this far, but I generally like to. I find it a lot easier to kind of work with later on. So let's just, and I also like to continue the line straight from where it was so we can extend the parting if we want to. So something like that will work well. You can also add random variation to this by doing like little squiggles, but I don't really recommend doing that in your block out. Just quickly refine that line. And there we go. So I'm just going to hit Save Textures, as always, in the tool settings. And then going to hit Save on You as well. Next step, let's set region mask to 1 and just make sure that our guides are doing roughly what they're told. And there we go, so now we've got a parting as well. So, next thing we need to do is stop it from parting at the back as well. That's easy enough to do. All we have to do is go into region mask, create map, and then same name again. Just correct the R to capital. For head 01 region mask, we're going to start with black, map resolution 30. That should be fine for now, but we can change that at any moment. The region map is the only one that we can't change. Again, hide the hair. Cool. And then let's just paint solid white. I'm also going to turn off reflection. Paint solid white along the parting. Something like that. I like to extend it a little bit further as well. To extend it either side. I don't suggest extending it at the back, but you can do if you really want to. But I do recommend going further than you think you need. Then we can hold Shift to blur that line. Which actually, let's just use the blur tool itself. Just blur that edge. As always, save texture, and then save our region map as well. And what that now does is we have a parting where we want it, but we don't have a parting at the back. So obviously this has been a super quick block out. We will continue to kind of work on these guides before I move on to clumping in a separate video, just so that I can walk you through it in real time, and so that you can see kind of how long this stuff takes, because it takes a lot longer than people realize. But yeah, so just to stop this video getting too long, I'm going to end it here. It's already 36 minutes. So I'll see you guys in the next video. If you wish to skip the real-time grooming, that's fine. I personally don't recommend it, but at the same time, watching 3 hours or 2 hours, however long it takes, of me just doing guides could probably get a little bit boring. But if you want to learn about it, it's all there. Next video of the tutorials will be clumping and noise and cut modifiers and all that nice stuff. So I'll see you in the next video. Enjoy the rest of your day, guys. Bye-bye.